Most people think five-star resorts are all about luxury, relaxation, and perfect service. But what guests don't see is the quiet system operating behind the scenes the moment they arrive. Long before the cocktails, the ocean view, or the smiling staff, decisions are already being made about who you are, how closely you will be watched, and how much effort will actually go into your experience. These resorts are not just designed to impress. They are designed to observe, categorize, and manage people without them ever realizing it. Certain behaviors trigger extra attention. Certain habits change how flexible the staff will be, and certain situations are handled very differently depending on what the resort has already decided about you. None of this is explained to guests, and none of it appears on the brochure. In this video, we're re-exposing real behind-the-scenes practices used in five-star resorts, the kind that only staff know and guests almost never notice. And once you understand how this system works, you'll never experience a luxury resort the same way again. Five-star resorts operate very differently from what most guests imagine. While the experience feels relaxed and effortless on the surface, the reality behind the scenes is structured, calculated, and heavily based on observation. From the moment a guest arrives, staff begin collecting small behavioral signals that help the resort decide how to manage that stay. This is not about spying or judgment in a moral sense, but about maintaining control in an environment where expectations are extremely high. One of the first things resorts quietly evaluate is how guests interact with the space itself. Guests who immediately explore, ask questions about amenities, or move confidently through the property are often perceived as experienced travelers. That experience signals familiarity with resort systems, which usually means fewer misunderstandings and smoother interactions later. Guests who appear overwhelmed, impatient, or confused are not treated poorly, but they are flagged internally as guests who may require more guidance and closer follow-up to avoid dissatisfaction. Another early factor is how guests communicate with staff. Five-star resorts train employees to listen not just to what is said, but how it is said. Guests who communicate clearly, respectfully, and with reasonable expectations are easier to support. Guests who communicate emotionally, vaguely, or with excessive demands early on often trigger internal adjustments in how staff prepare to respond to future requests. This does not mean service is reduced, but it often becomes more structured and carefully documented. Resorts also pay close attention to how guests handle small inconveniences. A brief delay, a miscommunication, or a minor issue during arrival can reveal a great deal about tolerance levels. Guests who remain calm signal adaptability, while guests who escalate quickly signal a higher risk of conflict later. Staff are trained to notice these reactions, not to judge character, but to predict scenarios that could disrupt the experience for both the guest and the resort. Luggage behavior is another subtle indicator. Guests who manage their belongings efficiently often appear organized and self-sufficient. Guests who struggle with luggage or appear scattered may receive additional assistance, reminders, or follow-up communication to prevent future issues. These adjustments are operational decisions, not personal ones. Five-star resorts also observe how guests treat staff members who are not perceived as decision-makers, such as bell staff, drivers, or housekeeping. These interactions are rarely dramatic, but patterns are noticed. Respectful or dismissive behavior toward frontline staff often predicts how guests will behave during moments of stress. Behind the scenes, staff share these impressions quietly, usually during shift changes or internal notes, not as gossip but as practical information. Another important aspect resorts evaluate early on is attentiveness. Guests who pay attention to instructions, schedules, and explanations tend to require less correction later. Guests who ignore information may need more reminders or proactive communication. Resorts adapt accordingly. None of these observations are meant to control guests, but to reduce uncertainty. Five-star resorts operate on predictability. When expectations are managed properly, the experience feels seamless. When expectations are mismatched, problems arise. The arrival phase offers the clearest snapshot of how a guest is likely to behave throughout the stay. That is why it carries so much weight internally. Many guests assume that luxury resorts base decisions on status or appearance alone, but behavior consistently outweighs visual signals. Appearance may shape a first impression, but actions refine it almost immediately. Another quiet decision influenced by early behavior is how proactive the staff will be. Some guests receive frequent check-ins, follow-ups, and personalized touches, while others experience a more hands-off approach. Both are intentional. Resorts aim to match service style to guest behavior, to avoid overwhelming some guests while ensuring others feel supported. This customization begins far earlier than most people realize. Even access to flexibility is influenced by early impressions. Late checkouts, minor exceptions, or small accommodations are easier to grant when staff believe the interaction will remain respectful and controlled. Guests who appear confrontational early on may still receive help, but staff are more cautious about setting precedents that could lead to escalation. None of these practices are written rules. They exist as institutional knowledge passed down through training and experience. 5-star resorts deal with hundreds of guests daily, and these quiet systems allow them to maintain consistency without constant intervention. The uncomfortable truth is that luxury hospitality is less about indulgence and more about management. Managing people, emotions, and expectations requires constant adjustment. The first interactions provide the most honest data. Once guests settle into the resort environment, behavior often becomes more polished and less revealing. That is why those early moments matter so much. Guests may believe the resort experience truly begins when they reach their room or the beach, but internally, the process has already been underway for some time. What happens next, after those initial observations are made, shapes the rest of the stay in ways most guests never consciously notice. After the initial observations are made, the internal system of a 5-star resort begins to quietly adjust around the guest. This is the part of the experience most people never see and never suspect exists. At these stays, the resort is no longer just reacting, it is anticipating. One of the first areas affected is prioritization. Resorts operate with limited resources, even at the highest level of luxury, and staff must constantly decide which requests require immediate action and which can wait. These decisions are rarely random. Guests who are perceived as calm, respectful, and predictable during arrival are often trusted to handle small delays without escalation, which allows staff to resolve issues more efficiently. Guests who showed signs of impatience or emotional reactions early on may receive faster responses, but those responses are often more formal, structured, and documented to prevent misunderstandings later. Another subtle adjustment happens in communication style. For some guests, staff will offer detailed explanations, proactive suggestions, and frequent check-in. For others, communication becomes shorter and more controlled, focusing only on essentials. This is not about providing less service, but about matching the style of interaction to what the resort believes will create the least friction. 5-star resorts understand that too much attention can feel intrusive to some guests, while too little can feel neglectful to others. These decisions are shaped quietly, based on early behavior patterns. Monitoring also changes as the stay progresses. This does not mean constant surveillance, but heightened awareness. Guests who demonstrate behaviors associated with complaints, confusion, or rule bending may be discussed during internal briefings, so that staff across departments are aligned. This alignment helps prevent surprises and ensures consistent responses. Guests who appeared self-sufficient and low risk often experience a more seamless stay because staff feel comfortable giving them space. Flexibility is another area heavily influenced by early impressions. Resorts have policies, but many policies exist within a range of discretion. Late checkouts, room changes, special requests, and small exceptions are easier to grant when staff believe the interaction will remain cooperative. When a guest has already shown a tendency to escalate or push boundaries, staff may still help, but they do so cautiously, often involving supervisors earlier in the process. This approach protects both the guest experience and the staff. Another behind-the-scenes decision involves how problems are framed internally. When an issue arises, staff subconsciously interpret it through the lens of the initial profile. A complaint from a guest perceived as reasonable is more likely to be treated as a legitimate service failure that needs correction. A similar complaint from a guest perceived as reactive may prompt additional verification and documentation before action is taken. The outcome may be the same, but the path to resolution often differs. Even the tone of internal discussions can change based on these perceptions. Room placement and adjustments can also be influenced in quiet ways. While booking type and availability are the primary factors, resorts sometimes make subtle positioning decisions to minimize potential dissatisfaction. This might involve placing guests in areas that align better with their observed preferences, such as quieter sections or locations closer to amenities. These are not dramatic changes, but small adjustments designed to prevent future complaints. Over time, the initial impression becomes less dominant as real interactions accumulate. However, it never fully disappears. It acts as a reference point that shapes how new information is interpreted. This is why two guests can experience the same resort very differently without understanding why. It is not favoritism, and it is not discrimination in the way people often imagine. It is a risk management. 5-star resorts are constantly balancing guest satisfaction, staff well-being, and operational efficiency. The systems that allow this balance are invisible by design. Guests are meant to feel relaxed, not managed. The uncomfortable reality is that luxury hospitality is not just about indulgence. It is about control. Control of expectations, emotions, and outcomes. Resorts that fail to manage these factors quickly lose their reputation. That is why these behind-the-scenes systems exist, and why staff are trained to rely on them. None of this means guests need to behave unnaturally or worry about being watched. The purpose is not to judge, but to adapt. Understanding how these systems work simply explains why certain experiences feel effortless, while others feel tense or complicated. If you have ever wondered why a simple request felt unusually easy or strangely difficult, the answer may lie in moments you barely remember. How you spoke, how you reacted, how you carried yourself early on. Those moments quietly set the tone. If you want to understand more about what really happens behind the scenes in places designed to appear perfect, and how these hidden systems shape everyday experiences, consider subscribing to the channel. Here on the 703 Room, we focus on the real processes, silent decisions, and unspoken rules that most people never notice, but that influence far more than they realize.